Hey, Ned, thanks for joining us today. As we're getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brian. I appreciate you having me on. My name is Ned Rossini. I'm Vice President of Sales for AW Companies, Inc., which is a full service BPO and contact center outsourcing partner. We're also in the staffing space as well. I have been in the contact center space for, going on 20 years now. Back when my hair was much blacker than it is now, I guess. But spent probably the first 15 years of that time in operations. So I started out as essentially a rep on the phone, worked my way up through the organization, and ended up probably having about 150 people report to me by the time it was all said and done. And exited operations, like I say, probably about 5 years ago, and joined sales, kind of stumbled into that role, and have been doing that ever since. So that's a little bit about me and kind of how I ended up where I am today.
And how do you like it?
So I really like sales. Kind of the biggest regret that I have about coming from operations to sales is I wish I would have gotten into sales about 5 years sooner, and kind of had a little bit more of 10 years of operations background, which is the greatest way to learn anything, of course, is to do it for that amount of time. But when I first got into sales, it was a little bit of like I say, kind of an unintended consequence of things that were going on for me in operations. We were on a large government contract that went away through no fault of our own. It just the government stopped doing this particular program, and so we went through a little bit of a layoff period there. And literally, Brian, the day that I got invited to join the sales team, my counterpart at a different office, I got laid off the day before. He and I communicated, of course, and I thought my number was going to get called. And lo and behold, they said, "Hey, Ned, would you want to join the sales team?" And I didn't even know we had a sales team, to be quite honest with you. I did, but I had no interaction with them. And so, yeah, but I really like sales, and honestly, probably think this is where I'll spend the rest of my career.
So, was it a choice?
It was a choice. So,
Okay.
the answer to that is yes, yes, no, no, right? So, luckily for me, I had someone that was in the C-suite that I had a good relationship with that was kind of pushing for me to get this sales job. I wasn't aware of that until like I say, the day that they brought me in to say, "Hey, would you be interested in joining the sales team?" I probably, ironically, I had another job already lined up because the layoff process is long, and the company had done the right thing with giving us plenty of heads up, and no one had done anything wrong. Of course, it was a circumstance that we were in, and so I did have a choice, but I wanted to stay with the company, and thought, I'd never thought about going into sales before, but I think I was at a place too after being in operations for 15 years that trying something new and trying something different was appealing. So I did have a choice, but then again, Brian, I kind of really didn't have a choice either.
Okay. And who do you call on? Who's your customer?
Yeah. So for us, so we're heavy into the retail space. We do some other areas as well, financial services, telecom, right, insurance space. But what you have to envision is any reason that a customer would need to reach out to an organization, there are various channels for them to do that, right? Primarily voice. So if you have a question for, say, your insurance company, you would call them and ask them that question. And then, of course, in the last 5 to 7 to 10 years, we've seen a huge shift to being it being a digital experience, and so those would be kind of the industries that we serve, and we serve the client's customers, if that makes sense.
Sure. Uh, is it a hard sell?
Is it a hard sell? It is I'm going to use the word difficult sale. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, the sales cycle is very long, right? So you're talking at least it's probably 9 to 12 to 18 month sales cycle. And there's a lot of relationship building that goes into that as well. So I think it's a difficult sell because within that sales cycle, so many things can happen. That are both positive and negative, to be quite honest with you, that are out of your control. And then the other thing that makes it a difficult sell, in my opinion, it's not a demoable product, right? It's not something that I can put on and show somebody and go, okay, well, here's how you increase these certain efficiencies by doing ABC. It's a philosophical sale, so to speak. It's a relationship based sale. And then really a lot of what contact centers are offering, there's not a huge variation in, for example, the actual process of putting in a contact center project. There are differentiators. There's no doubt about that. But when it comes to, one being this dynamically different product than the other, there's not a whole lot of that as well. So I would say that it's a difficult sell. Maybe not a, I don't know if hard's the right word, but it's you get a lot more no's than you get yeses.
Because they have something in place already. Is that true? Yeah.
Typically, yes. So you basically have kind of three types of buyers, I would say. One is an organization who, let's say, for example, they're in the startup phase and they've now grown to a place to where they go, okay, we're having enough customer contact that we need to do something different, right? And so they'll bring in an outsourcer that may have been part of their roadmap from day one, but it took a little time for them to grow there. Number two is someone who's been doing it in-house themselves, and it's just not a part of their core competency and something that, for lack of a better term, they're just not doing a good job at. And they're saying, "Hey, we don't. We're in the grocery retail business. We're not in the contact center business." And they'll bring a contact center partner in maybe for the first time, but the most common application is someone who is currently using contact center outsourcing partners. The contract comes up every 3 years or 5 years or 2 years or whatever it is, and they're now interviewing other people to come in, and they may have seven partners that they use, or they may have one. So there's all different types of scenarios.
So it's trying to find the right time. You don't want to be too early or too late, or
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the dance that you play, right? And so that's why the sales cycle is so long. And then even outside the sales cycle itself, I might meet somebody this afternoon who just signed a 3-year deal with somebody that they're going to stay in. And it's my job and my responsibility to stay in contact with that person and basically manage that relationship for a good 2 years until that sales cycle kicks off again. And the highs and lows that go along with that, for the good of humanity, you hope they have a good experience with the current vendor that they have. But then, kind of selfishly, you're also hoping that the current vendor had some type of misstep, or there's something that's occurred where they're interested in choosing somebody else.
and how's this transition into sales gone for you personally?
Yeah, so yeah, great question, and I appreciate you asking that. It's been the biggest learning experience of my life tenfold, and what I would say is there's been a tremendous amount of advantages that I think make my situation unique, and the success that I've had is largely attributed to the fact that I spent all that time in operations and really kind of know exactly what a person's going through that I'm calling on. But there's also, and so that's been a huge advantage, right? But there's been some tremendous disadvantages that I've had too in being thrust into what is kind of an enterprise sales role with really not knowing a whole lot about sales. So it's the ultimate yin and yang. It's been a challenge. It's been rewarding. It's been all the above.
And how have you prevented yourself from getting overwhelmed? That,
And so the answer is through experience because I've not always done that, right? And so at first, I certainly did not do a very good job of keeping myself from getting overwhelmed. And most of the things that I've learned in my, kind of what is I would consider to be still a short sales career in 5 years is I've had to learn the hard way. And so the main thing is when you come from an operations role, especially in the business that I'm in, which is contact center, you measure your success hourly. I mean, in some cases, 15-minute increments, and then it rolls up from there to daily and monthly and annually and things of that nature. And so enterprise sales just isn't that way. I mean, you may do something today that 6 months from now you might get a response to, and that be the best response you've had in the last 3 months. So the first thing that I had to learn was how to I guess temper my expectations when it comes to what I viewed as like daily success versus non-daily success. And honestly, Brian, it took me a good 6 months to get my head wrapped around that. I may try really hard on Thursday and not get a single response or just get no's or nothing happen. And then that may be weeks on end, and I may be saying to myself, man, I'm failing at this job, when in reality, it's just a different cadence to what you're doing, as opposed to a role that's in operations, and especially in the business I was in.
that's it, because as mammals, we're really good at stimulus response, kind of your operations role. How many
Correct.
calls you process per hour was probably your KPI, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
But we're not really good at, okay, stimulus, no response for a long period of time, stimulus, stimulus, action, 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 and then outcome.
Yeah. And what I find is, for me, um, I spend 90% of my time at best, right, for what it would be considered like 10% of the actual outcome or action of what you're looking for. So you'll spend all this time going through the steps that you need to go through to put yourself in a position to eventually win a deal 12 months down the road or whatever the case may be. And I think for me, I had a very common perception of sales in my mind, which I think a lot of people have, which is, well, we're just out here on the golf course shooting the old golf egg around, closing deals left and right. Like what's the problem? You know what I mean? And but what you find out is that it's lonely, right? I mean, I go from working in a contact center with several hundred people to now working at home by myself even before the pandemic, working my butt off and getting no results. It's a different animal altogether, and it's as much a mental exercise of how to prepare for that as it is what I would consider to be like the tangible skills of, okay, how do I go about doing this job successfully? Steps 1 through 8 in the sales process, right? So I did okay with that, and thank goodness that's where the operations experience comes into play, but it works against you from a mindset standpoint.
Yeah. So how have you kept the mindset from going a little crazy or, strategy du jour?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple different ways with that. One is, as I said, I wish I had a better, I guess, like a more romantic answer other than saying, had some sleepless nights. Have had definitely spent periods of time, with anxiety and stress and things of that nature, and not necessarily in a negative way, in a good way, the way you would want someone who's competitive and wants to do well and things of that nature. If I go a couple weeks without getting a positive response, or it seems like any response that I get is negative, you want a salesperson to be concerned about that, right? So those things are all positive, but you have to learn to accept the things that you can control and not accept the things that you can't control. For example, in operations, if I get behind on my task list for whatever reason, I can show up at the office at 6:30 a.m. I don't love to do it, but I can get an hour and a half of time where I'm going, okay, here's the 3 things I'm going to work on, and then I'm kind of caught up. Or I can do that at the end of the day or whatever the case may be. But sales isn't like that. You have to um, educate yourself on ways to handle it mentally, and that is by saying, look, I'm on step 4 in this sales cycle. I've done these 4 the very best that I can. I'm waiting on step 5 to occur, but there's no amount of hope or wish or anxiety or anguish that I can do to make that 5th step happen. So you just have to learn through experience. And I would even have salespeople who would want to help me with that because they would see me struggling. And I think it's the competitor in me that wanted to do well. And they would say, hey, man, you've got to kind of protect your own mindset a little bit and just know that that person may never call you back, or that person, is busy with 12 other projects or this, that, or whatever. So you just learn through experience to go, hey, everything's okay. It'll circle back around. And then there's a yin and yang too, right? There's those ones where I thought I'd never hear from the prospect ever again. Next thing I know, they've got a new position with their current company or a new position with a new company. It's a perfect fit for what they do. And they're reaching back out to me saying, hey, man, I think there's a fit here. Let's get together and talk about that. So you learn that for every kind of negative situation, there's a positive situation, or there's at least some type of ratio there. But you just have to stay in it for a while and learn those lessons yourself, or at least that's what I did.
And what do you think the smartest thing you've done in the last 5 years as far as your process?
Sure. So the smartest thing I've done in the last 5 years, Brian, to be honest with you, and I hope I don't offend salespeople that are out there listening to this podcast right now. So I want to be careful how I say this is. The smartest thing I've done is I've never shed my operation skin at all. Everything that I do, and my approach from the way that I think about how I'm going to prospect all the way through, the steps in the sales cycle. I feel like I'm consistently able to put myself in that person's shoes and what they're dealing with. And to be quite honest with you, that's the biggest differentiator for me. I've never, when I first came into sales, right, the first 6 months, my thought process was, why would anyone want to meet with me and talk about contact center if you're the VP of contact center for XYZ brand, right? Some logo that we all know. And what I found was that kind of humility, to put myself in their shoes and say, well, here's what I went through when I was in that role, and here's the things that I struggled with. And that's how I would approach my outreach to them instead of doing something like, hey, your 7 steps to fix all your problems in this one email, right? Or like, here's how everyone else gains efficiency and saves money in your shop type deal. Because when I was in operations and I would get that type of outreach, I had very little interest in interrupting my daily flow to stop and read an email from somebody that would say, you know, kind of these gimmicky cliche emails that are so popular that so many people do. Instead, I would say something like, hey, here's the problem I faced when I was in your shoes. Are you facing that problem as well? Do you want to get together and talk about it? And I that may break every sales prospect rule that there possibly is. But what I found is in the first 6 months, I got very positive response to that. And then I had kind of tenured sales folks coming and saying, how are you getting these meetings with these logos or this company or this company, or are you actually getting these meetings? And the answer was always yes. It's because I didn't know any better. It's because I didn't know what else to do except speak from my current experience that I had. And I was surprised at how responsive people were to that, as opposed to 7 steps to your best, XYZ, fill in the blank, whatever it is that they're sending, to everybody and their brother that they're getting 42 times a day. It was something that would stand out to them as unique. And a lot of times I found, and this wasn't necessarily on purpose, Brian, or trying to manipulate it. Again, I just didn't know any better. I think, especially at first, a lot of the people that I was calling on, I don't think they realized I was in sales until probably like maybe, halfway through the first meeting, or maybe by the second meeting or the third meeting, where it kind of came out that that's what we were doing, because the first meeting would just be about kind of what their problems are. And yeah, I feel your pain when it comes to that. And we would have a conversation. So I mistakenly came across that strategy, and I've kind of kept that the entire time. And I feel like people are as you build relationships with them, when you have that approach, they're much more truthful with you. They feel like, they know that I'm not necessarily trying to take advantage of them, or what's the best way for me to get the sale, or what's, I don't have that DNA inside of me to do that. And so, as a person who was in operations all that time, I have the luxury of saying, "Oh man, I remember when that happened to us," and then I tell a story, and the next thing you know, we're laughing about it, and then they call me back 3 months later and say, "Hey man, I wanted to talk to you more about that," and or when I call them, they answer the phone, and it's a good relationship, and I just never shed that, and then I developed that into kind of what was a mistaken strategy into more of an intentional strategy, and it's paid dividends for me along the way.
So you led with your strength instead of trying to remove your strength and try and start completely from scratch and
Right.
copy somebody else.
Yeah, right. And so it was, and actually, the system that we use, which is a system that the vast majority of people use, right? We use Salesforce like most of the rest of the world. And so in Salesforce, you have the luxury of going back and kind of seeing what other people are doing in the way of their outreach. Like it automatically catalogs what you did. And so I know at first I would go back, and I don't want to offend any of my former colleagues or anything, but I would go back and read their emails. And as someone who was fresh off the contact center floor, I was like, no one's ever going to
Yours.
respond to that. And if they do, they respond to anybody. So there's really nothing that's unique going on with what you have to say and do. And so I was able to kind of learn, not only not reinvent what I was doing to kind of take on the mantra of the typical salesperson, but I actually read that and went, that's never going to work. This person's never going to respond to you if you keep doing this type of kind of gimmicky, cliche, fill in the blank type stuff. So um, I think that was a huge advantage for me, and not an advantage that a lot of people have. And so the advice that I would have for someone who doesn't have the same luxury of coming from operations like I did, I would encourage them to go talk to the people that they trust that are within their organization that are in this position that they're trying to sell to, right? So if you're selling human resources services or payroll services or IT items or whatever you may be selling, I would recommend you go talk to those people and ask them what type of pain they're feeling or what's their life like. And then, if you're a lifetime salesperson, match up what you thought, kind of what was going on in the industry, and what these people are actually telling you about what's going on in the industry. And I think that's the best way to learn how to position yourself and what is interesting to people out there, and try to get them to start that process of building a relationship.
Yeah, I think today people think that all these executives don't want to talk. Well, they don't want to talk about you. They want to talk
Sure.
about them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a great point as well, Brian. And some of the first sales advice that I got was, and I didn't get a tremendous a lot of sales coaching in the beginning, or really if at any point, which actually turned out to be an advantage for me. I don't know if that was strategic by my first manager or not, but it made me figure things out for myself, which was good. But that was some of the first sales advice. They do want to talk and they will talk. And here's the other thing that I learned too. Like in that first 6 months, it was why would someone want to talk to me about contact center? Well, what I found out, and then like by month 7, I was like, oh, Jiminy Crickets, these people want to talk to me a lot. You know what I mean? So I kind of had this problem on my hands where I was like,
Yeah, you're a
I'm getting nervous
consultant.
because
Yeah,
yeah, it's like, geez, what, not at first it was, am I going to be any good at this job? Now it's like, my
I'm
goodness,
too good at it.
what if I am good at this job? Like, what does that mean? And that thought never entered my head when I first took the job. It was more about, gosh, we'll see how this goes. How long is it going to take for these people to figure out that I'm not a good resource to talk to about this stuff? Turns out I was a good resource to talk to. And then the problems that they had are the same problems that I had when I was in their seat. Now, maybe it's a different industry, it's a different KPI, it's a different this, that, or whatever, but the problems were generally the same. And so what I learned is stop putting the prospect that you're calling on this pedestal that's in an unhealthy way to you. Be respectful of the prospect. That goes without saying. I'm not saying that at all, but when I was first walking into meetings, I was going, how long is it going to take this person to figure out that I'm low man on the totem pole and I really can't match what they know and what they do? That was unhealthy to me, right? That was hurting my
Doesn't
sales
solve you.
process, and it was setting me back. I was spotting them 7 points before I ever walked into the on the field, so to speak. And what I learned was sometimes I knew more about it than they did, and that's not from a place of arrogance. It gave me confidence to go in and say, hey, I can help this person solve this problem if I can get to the root of what the problem is. And that was a big kind of light bulb moment for me as well. But I'll tell you, Brian, the thing that helped me out the most, and this was the first good deal that I closed with a big logo that kind of shocked everybody at my company, including me, was I was going to this appointment and I was with a as I said, a nice logo and a high ranking person in this organization. And I hadn't been doing this very long. I was nervous. I'm going to go down there by myself and walk in this conference room and talk to these people about their contact center. And, who knows what that's going to be like for me. And I just remember saying, not even planning it, just kind of blurting out, hey, I'm not going to be the slickest salesperson you ever met in your life, right? I don't have a ton of sales experience, but I've been in the contact center space for 15 years. I've walked a mile in your shoes, so to speak. And I kind of expanded upon that and articulated that in a way that made sense to them. And I physically, and I'm not a body language expert, but I physically watched their body language change. And I began to build trust with them right away. And I ended up getting the deal in an industry that we had never served before. And I remember getting a call from my CFO and then a note from my CEO that said, hey man, you might be pretty good at this job. You may want to think about sticking with this and seeing how it goes. But it was just coming from a place of honesty, saying, and the comment back to me was good because we're tired of talking to salespeople. We want to talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about. So totally unintended consequence. And to this day, Brian, I open up most of my meetings with some version of that statement of, listen, I'm not trying to be the greatest sales guy that ever lived, but I know a thing or two about contact centers, and that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. So that's been helpful for me, that mindset.
Yeah, because I think you hit the nail on the head. Customers are used to salespeople not understanding the problem.
Right.
And
Right. And
that's
that's
what,
really, and yeah, that's one of the biggest problems I see in the industry that I serve with the colleagues that I'm in that I have respect for. And there's all different types of sales folks out there, but I think it's a lack of understanding of what the pain points are, of what people are going through. And then what's the applicable solution that you can kind of become a consultant with them with and say, hey, here's what's worked in the past. It sounds like a good fit for you. Would you be interested in talking more about that? Typically, the answer is yes. And then over the course of time, they're revealing more of what the problem is. More people are coming to the meeting. When I'm making that follow up call, they're taking my call, and other people are going, "Well, how are you getting this?" And I'm like, "How are you not getting this?" You know what I mean? Like, why would you be asking me that? So that's definitely a big part of it.
and for the audience, let's give them an example of why the other salespeople weren't getting it, because they were talking about the metrics of your company, the other logos, the world class this and market leader
Sure.
that
Yeah,
doesn't mean
absolutely.
anything.
and the whole and everybody's saying the same thing, right? So there's no real differentiator there. And the poor, because I've been the operations person in the room where you think to yourself, basically your only thought is when is this going to be over? There's nothing interesting being said where the person goes, you know what, I've been in that situation a bunch of times. I've never thought to resolve it or solve it like that. Even if it's not the perfect solution, it's got them thinking, and it's got them respecting your knowledge, and it's got them curious of what else you might have to say or things that you might have to add to what they're doing. And then you become valuable to them as opposed to being a time suck on them, where there's really, to your point, going, hey, here's our geo footprint. Here's the other clients that we serve. Here's the resume of our C-level people. And look at all the great stuff they've done. And that poor person in the seat is saying, I'm not
Okay.
interested in your CEO's background of where he worked 20 years ago, or where she worked 5 years ago. That's great. But what's that got to do with me and the problems that I'm facing today?
And let's say somebody who is green to the call center industry, if they came in, how long would it take them to learn, not as deep as you, but kind of
Sure.
deep enough to have those conversations?
Yeah, you mean on the sales side, I think it's gonna, like, on the operation side, I think it's probably about a 2-year process is what I would say, that you've kind of been through all the battles that there are to go through, right? You've been through some type of seasonal ramp, or you've been through, the contract I was on was a government contract, and it was in the financial services space. So, like, dealing with an IRS tax season during that time is a unique experience that you have to go through to know what that's like. And a season or two of that, and you'll learn some stuff about what it's like in the call center under being pressure and things like that. So, from an operations standpoint, probably about 2 years. From a sales standpoint, it can be quite a bit longer, I think, because um, there's so many, just like with a lot of industries, there's so many different scenarios and so many different vertical markets that are out there. So, for a salesperson, I think they have to go talk to people that have walked that walk and been in that situation before to see what type of pain they're going through. So that's a good question, Brian, that I've never thought of how long it would take another salesperson. I'm going to put it at 5 years, to really have like that detail, intricate experience. And different BPO partners kind of have different sales strategies. So some BPO partners, for example, say, hey, now you only sell to utilities, right? Or you only reach out to, banks or financial services. And so those people, their learning curve is probably a lot shorter. I've always been in organizations, and I haven't been in many, just a few, but where we weren't necessarily siloed by industry type, which is great. I love that as a salesperson to be able to call on anything. But I do think I need to know a lot about utilities. I need to know a lot about banks. I need to know a lot about telecom, government, retail, so on and so forth. It's even more challenging because even though all verticals are similar when it comes to their contact center experiences, there's certainly nuances, that, for example, an insurance client is going to expect you to know versus a telecom client.
But I got to imagine that the companies, either yours or the competitors, would have sales reps and then kind of experts.
Yeah, absolutely. So the general strategy is, of course, to bring in a subject matter expert, no doubt about it. So, for example, like on an initial discovery call, I would typically handle that myself. And then maybe there needs to be two discovery calls or three. You know how that goes. It depends on how much information you're able to get, and that kind of thing there, and how those calls go. But at a certain point, it's always been a strategy for the companies that I've worked for, and I would assume all of them, that once you've kind of gathered the information in and now you've built the solution, you go back to them with those particular operations leader, or IT connectivity leader, or hiring leader, or whatever the case would be, and kind of present that information to them.
And what part of sales surprised you?
So the part of sales, the difficulty of the mental part of it was the thing that surprised me the most, and it's because I didn't know what I didn't know. um I had no idea that it was going to be such a roller coaster ride, right? So I joke around and tell people that I've had mornings where I woke up and thought to myself, I'm going to be the next CEO of this company, because, man, I'm this is going fantastic. Look at all these logos and these meetings and all this stuff. And then by lunch, you're like, they're going to show me the door. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not even kidding. Like, this person got back to me and said the deal's off. off, or we're not moving forward, or we're sticking with our current person, or they just ghosted me altogether, or whatever the case may be. And so, and then by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm back to thinking, no, I'm going to be the CEO because the person did get back to me, right? That was the part for me that, as a person being new to sales, was the most difficult thing for me to handle, because of what I think is absolutely crucial for a good salesperson, is having a competitive spirit and just being hungry all the time. When you have that, it's hard to take a loss. And there's so many losses in sales, and loss isn't the right word. Maybe it's you didn't get the outcome that you wanted when you wanted it, as exactly the time frame that you wanted. Is probably a better way of putting it than a loss. But that was the hardest part for me, was the mental piece of it, the ups and downs, and learning how to manage that. And it took me a good 2 to 3 years of learning that. And then the other thing that I would say is, Brian, maybe more tangible, is learning about different personality types that are out there. Some people are slow to trust. Some people are quick to trust. Some people want to get straight to the point. Some people you gotta get to know, everything about their family and their dog and who their favorite sports team is and all that stuff. And some people, they don't want to waste their time with that, right?
Yeah.
So learning how to handle those personality types, and say, from a strategy standpoint, that's not manipulative but beneficial to both the prospect and myself. How do I go about handling those? Because I had the widgets down. That wasn't anything that I needed to learn. It was, okay, what are the characteristics of Brian, and what's the best way for me to approach him so that I'm serving him the best way possible, and making him say, okay, this guy Ned's actually going to be an asset to me, instead of somebody that every time the phone rings I go, oh great, not this guy again.
Cool. Hey, Ned, this has been a great conversation. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
Yeah, definitely. So, of course, LinkedIn, they can check out my profile there. And so, but our website is awcompaniesinc.com. And you can find us there as well. So that's A as in Alpha, W as in Wendy, companiesinc.com. And again, message me on LinkedIn. We'd love to get together and chat with anybody who may be struggling with sales, or just want to talk about it, or talk about the industry, whatever the case may be.